Next thing, 2 weeks after I start, this big guy comes and he stands on top of me and he says, "You're sitting in my desk." I looked, I said, "It's not your desk anymore." He says, "This is my desk." I said, "It's not." So he went to Gary Khan and he said, "Gary," he said, "What? This guy got my desk." He says, "I didn't employ him, Colin employed him." So he went to Colin and he says, "Colin, why you employed this guy?" I said, "My desk." He says, "I didn't employ him, Gary employed him."
This guy employed himself. I first met Nick at a wedding a few years ago, and within moments I realized that I wasn't just talking to a successful businessman. I was actually talking to someone whose life has been anything but normal. Nick's story is a vivid tapestry of adventure, extreme fortune, and crushing misfortune. It's the kind of life that truly belongs in a book to inspire others. While many know him today as the mind behind a multi-billion rand property empire, I know him as a good friend, an incredible mentor, and one of South Africa's most genuinely inspiring entrepreneurs. But to understand the Nick of today, you need to understand the wild years, the failures, the 2010 crash that nearly took everything, and the legacy of a family that once touched the sun and fell back to earth. Nick, it is an amazing privilege and an honor for me to be here, and thank you so much for taking the time. Obviously, I wanted to do this for a very long time, and once you said, "Listen, I'm in Joburg," I said to Rickert, "Listen, clear everything, please. If we can get to Nick, that would be awesome." To set this up, I think if we can go back to, I named it the Potato King legacy, and that's actually, for the people that don't know, your grandfather was a potato farmer in South Africa, and once he was one of the wealthiest men in South Africa. So, and then he lost everything. How did that start your journey? What psychologically happened to your outlook on business and life in general? I think if we can start there, I think that paints a picture of your drive and where you are today.
It's an interesting one because it did have an effect. The first one was that I've got to do the same. The second one was like, wow, those are big shoes to fill. And the third one was, how am I going to do it? So I actually had it in my head that I want to be the richest man in the world for a long time, and that was inspired by my grandfather. But although he had made so much money, he was a very simple guy. He stayed in the same house. So it was more about achievement. And they say he was the biggest independent potato producer in the world. And he was crowned a potato king in South Africa. And the irony of the whole story was that he actually came with nothing. He came to South Africa with 50 cents. He gathered up some cows from independent African farmers, corralled them together, and that's how he got his first loan from the bank. And that's how I started. And yeah, I was crowned potato king. And then he lost his money, it was drought, some other bad things. And I always just think, how can you lose so much money, Granddad? You know, it's like, it used to upset me that he actually lost all that money.
But later you realized that
I realized.
But we'll get there, yeah.
But also when I spoke to him at the end and I asked him if he regretted it, and this also had an impact on me, and he told me all the things he had done and the great life that he had lived. And then I realized, well, at that moment, that it's actually the destination is very little part of it, and the journey is actually the most important.
Your early years, obviously growing up, there was tough times. Obviously, you didn't get the silver spoon treatment.
You know, my biggest struggle for me was, all struggles are relative, right? Every person struggles with the biggest struggles in their life. My big struggle was that when I finished matric, I fought to get a university entrance. And I was so excited about it. I didn't have great marks, I was quite naughty. And I only got into 2 universities. But I was excited. And then when I gave my mom my entry, and I told her, I'm going to university, she took the paper, didn't seem too happy. I didn't know why. He realized afterwards that there was no money for me to go to university. And she went around to different family members. She came back to me a few days later and said, I'm so sorry, there's no money for you to go to varsity. And at that point, my world fell apart. It was like, my grandfather put people through university that he never met. And no one kept 1 cent for me. It's like, who does that? And my mom was a single parent. My father wasn't at home. There were 5 kids. So, and because I was the toughest kid mentally, I was the one who was looked after the least. So I just used to wake up in the morning and lie in bed, depressed. What am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do? You wake up like that, you can only do that 20 or 30 times. And then one day, this was a defining moment in my life because I sat up from the bed, and you have these defining moments and you remember them vividly. It is like a movie, and everything is sharper, the light's sharper, the colors are sharper, the sensations, the smells, everything. And the look on the one side of my leg was an old Mercedes. I had all these old cars on my duvet cover, and on the right side was an old Rolls Royce. And I'm just mentioning that because that's how vividly I remember this. This was nearly 40 years ago. And I said to myself, from this day forward, I will rely on nobody, only on myself. And I can only blame myself for my success and for my failure. So it was a defining moment in my life. There were some bad elements to it because it really separated me emotionally. I became emotionally very, very tough. And it took me years to actually reconnect that. But it got me through everything. It got me through walking around the streets looking for a job. Eventually, when I got a job as an article clerk, catching a bus. And in those days, if you were a white person catching a bus, you weren't catching a bus with the best people in town, I had to catch 2 buses to work, and one to town, and from town, and to earn 750 Rand. And to get through that, like emotionally, it was the toughness that I had to develop,
You said now you were 5 siblings, but you were the toughest mentally. Do you think that was, you were just born with that, or was it, you just talked about, you think wealth is like, it's genetic. You can acquire. You just elaborate on that. I think.
So another answer, and it's not the answer I wanted to hear, because I always thought, I was who I was because of me, and it was quite strange because I did DNA test, and I wanted to find out as much as I could about myself, but more from a health perspective. And the lady says to me, "No, you've got the warrior gene." I said, "What, the warrior gene?" She goes, "Yeah, it's like a fighting gene." So that's what we call it. She said, "But you've got resilience, and you can really, really do well in tough times." And so I looked at that, and then on the other side of the spectrum, my younger sister committed suicide. And I always used to look at her, and I used to look down on her. So she always used to see her as more inferior because she was so much more sensitive, so much more vulnerable. And only later in life, I look back and say, well, how much was in her control?
Okay, so the article years you went through, when did you realize that, listen, I'm not going to be an auditor my whole life. I want to excel. I wanted to be the richest man in the world at that time. That was your 20s, I assume.
When I was an early teenager, I knew that I didn't want to be an auditor. But for me, it was very simple. Until I get what I want, I'll do what I have to do. And for me, accounting, and also, especially in Pretoria, you get brought up, you have to have a fallback, you have to have something to fall back on. So that was probably half of it. And the other half for me was, I want to be in business, I want to make my own money, I need to understand numbers, and I was good at numbers. And I was very fortunate. I started my articles when I was 17, and it was a Jewish firm. And my Jewish friends were talking about property, and we're talking about investments, and all my other friends were talking about partying and jolly.
Whatever.
And I was like, no, these guys are my guys. So
They're heading in the direction, yeah.
I got my first endowment. The first thing I spent on was an endowment policy, like 20 or 30 Rand a month in those days, yeah. And then I tried to buy my first property, but I wasn't a major, I was a minor. And it would cost me more to be a major in court to help me acquire the property than the deposit. So I said, okay, I'll just have to wait until I'm 21.
How old were you when you tried to buy your first property?
Like 18. But in those days, you could get good gearing because, you're studying accounting. Accountants were
Seen as
very, very
yeah,
well
yeah.
liked. And also in those days, it was much easier to buy property than it is now. Those days, there was no such thing as serviceability. If you're getting a degree or if you've got an asset, very easy to gear up.
You must just talk to the bank manager.
Yeah, if you liked, you could get something your own. So I worked doing private books in the evenings. I also studied in the evenings. I used to sell clothes on the weekend. And I did whatever I could. And I built up like 20 grand, which was a lot of money when your salary is 700. And then the guy who was doing his books, pizzeria, he said, listen, he's in a position, he needs to sell the business because he's got a new job at the casino and it's well paid. So he couldn't sell his business because his books weren't correct. So I said, look, you're never going to sell the business on the books, but let's do a deal. I'll buy the business with you by 50%. You work in the day because you only work at the casino at night, and I'll work at night. She says, but you're studying. I said, no, I'll study, then I'll come and close. So, and then after 6 months, we'll work out the profit, and I'll take it off what I owe you.
Yeah, you buy the business out of the cash flow.
After 6 months, do the books. I'm an accountant, 48,000 profit, fantastic, 24,000 off what I owe, and we're off to the races. I get a call from the landlord. He said, Nick, you haven't been paying the rental. And I've asked around town, apparently you're a good boy. I just need to know what's going on. I said, look, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, I don't pay the expenses. I'm 50% part-time, but I do the books and I just make sure we make a profit. So he says to me, let me find out, I'll get back to you. So he phones me a week later. He says, your partner's been gambling. He's not paying any of the expenses. You need to get rid of him. I'm 20 years old.
What? That's crazy.
Now I got him my first meeting with a 45-year-old and fire him.
Yes, that's incredible.
So I'm sitting with him. I'm saying to him, listen, you're gambling. You gambled our money away. You got to leave. He didn't put up a fight. He agreed and he left, but he left me with a nightmare. Now I was 20 years old. I'm doing final year exams. I've got full-time articles. And I could have run the business on my own with no cash flow. I'm getting calls in the day that they're running out of cheese. It was absolutely terrible. And then what happened? The franchisor, to add fuel to the fire, went and sold these cards that allowed everyone to buy a pizza at any pizza den in South Africa and get one pizza for free. So all of a sudden my turnover dropped by half, and he took all the money. So for the cards. So the franchisees phoned me and said, listen, we're putting a class action together against Peter. Please join us. I'm like, guys, I'm 20 years old. I don't even have money to study next year because I lost the business. But throughout the whole thing, I phoned Peter, although he did this, the franchisor, the lease was in his name. I said, Peter, I'll make sure the lease, we'll find another lessee. Whatever money Vasily owed you, I'll sell all my equipment and I'll pay you, which I did. And he said to me, Nick, you're such a good guy. I really appreciate you. You know, what can I do for you? I said, I just want money to do my CTA next year. So he says, no, come to the shop. Come to the shop in Sunnyside and I'll give you money. He made me come there every Friday night for 6 months. I had no money. So I used to wait there from 8 o'clock till the shop closed. And in 6 months, I gave me 200 rand.
What?
Yeah. But those things make you tough, make you tougher. When it first happened, the first time I contemplated suicide, I was like, I've lost all my money that I worked so hard to get, everything. And I'm not going to be a millionaire when I'm 21. I was devastated. I picked myself up, and it was my first time I lost everything.
That's incredible. And how old were you then? 20? But you wanted to be a millionaire before 21. That was the goal.
That was the first goal.
What?
The first goal. So then what happened, some people said to me, listen, if you want to make good money, go work as a dealer for poker. But it's very hard hours. So I said, how hard? So, well, you could work from 8 o'clock on Sunday night till 8 o'clock on Monday night, 24 hours. I was like, what? I was like, but I did that. And I used to make up to 1,500 in a night. And it was big money in those days.
Yeah, it's better than Clerk salary.
Yeah. So I still had some books that I was doing. I'd finished my articles now, finished my degree. And I was supposed to be studying my CTA. It was a bit hard with the poker because I was playing twice a week and I wasn't sleeping much.
So you were playing as well?
Not playing, sorry.
No, just
dealing.
dealing,
I wasn't
yeah.
playing. And then there were people who knew that I was going to do well in business. They just knew I was so driven. And I had offers from them. The one was my cousin who had a sugarcane factory, but he only offered me 1% equity. I said no. Then it was my mother's youngest brother, whom I was very close with. And he said, listen, whatever you want to do, I'll back you in. So I thought this is an opportunity. So I looked around and I saw that the Pick n Pay franchise was an opportunity. So between me, another friend of his, and him, we opened a supermarket. We ran it for a year. And in that year, I realized one thing, that I do not want to run a supermarket. It is one of the hardest businesses in the world to run. But I was over exuberant. I was 22. And we managed to sell it and we made a little bit of money, but it was
hard work.
It was hard work. And I thought, okay, now that's it. Let me start on my own again. I want to become a stockbroker. So one of my clients at the supermarket was Gary Kahn from Kahn Shapiro and Colin Goldstein, who was a friend of mine from school, with other partners. I phoned them up and I said, guys, I'm coming to work at Kahn Shapiro. They said, we don't need anybody. I said, you didn't hear me. I said, I'm coming to work there. I didn't ask if you need anybody. Now, in those days, the one thing I wasn't short of, I was very confident, and I just, whatever, if I put my mind to it, and that's it.
Why stockbroking on that stage of your life?
I think it was influenced by my father when I was very young. I remember him playing stocks, and I loved numbers, and there was an opportunity to go to London.
Through them?
No, I knew, my father knew someone who was at Investec, and they said, I think they were just trying to fob me off. They said, get experience in South Africa, then maybe you can talk to us. So I don't think they would have taken me, but anyway, it set me off on that path. And I started trading. So I get a Kahn Shapiro, I start working. Don't know what I'm doing. Next thing, 2 weeks after I start, this big guy comes and he stands on top of me and he says, you're sitting in my desk. I looked, I said, it's not your desk anymore. He says, this is my desk. I said, it's not. So he went to Gary Kahn and he said, Gary, he said, what? This guy got my desk. He says, I didn't employ him, Colin employed him. So he went to Colin and he says, Colin, why you employed this guy? I said, my desk. He says, I didn't employ him, Gary employed him.
This guy employed himself.
So he came to me and he was fuming. I said, listen, I don't want to fight with you. I said, I'm going to do you a favor. You can share the desk with me. And we shared the desk, and about 2 months later, he said to me, listen, I've got all the brokerage that the guys are earning. And now at this point, I thought these guys are nothing to me. I already opened my first nightclub. That was while I had the supermarket. We opened a nightclub with 80 grand. We bought a black steer, but for nearly nothing, which was my first lesson. Don't think you're buying cheap. It's a good price. So I had the black steer, I had a supermarket, I had a nightclub, I had my big compound, I had my articles, and I was 22, and like, what do these guys know? And then I see the brokerage sheet. I was like, wow, these guys were earning a fortune. But it was 1996. So it was just before the 97 crash. And I was like, no, this is my...
This is the game.
This is where I'm staying. And it was probably one of the funnest times of my life because I was so motivated. I used to, when the weekend came, I was so depressed. I wouldn't leave the office. I'd stay up until 12 o'clock. I'd write articles for whoever would listen to me. And at that time, anyone would listen to anyone who was a stockbroker. And just to show my exuberance and my overconfidence, about a month into the job, Jared Kahn walked into the trading floor and he said, I can't make the radio today. Can anybody go in my place? And I said, I can. Everyone looked at me and they thought, this guy's like, must be amazing. He's going on the radio and he's just started.
Yeah. Knows everything.
So, I go on the radio and the presenter starts, welcome Nicholas Katsapas from Kahn Shapiro. Thank you so much. It's been an amazing day on the market today. Gold's taken quite a hiding. What can you tell us about that? What do I know about gold? I just heard the guys talking about the gold standard, which was actually abolished in, I think, 1973 or 1974. So I said to him, it's been a rough day today. They abolished the gold standard this morning, and I think it's really... He looked at me, his eyes nearly popped out. And he says, the gold standard was abolished, in 1974, whenever it was. Anyway, he proceeded to ask 40 questions, of which all he answered, and he didn't ask me another question again in the interview.
Yeah, and you learn.
But I learned. And then I slowly built up my base, and I became a good stockbroker. But just to rewind, I did buy my property eventually at 21. And that was in 1994. It was when Mandela was coming out. And if you were a white person in South Africa, you believed that there was a good possibility we were either going to get killed or driven out the country. And my thing was, well, if I buy property and that happens, it doesn't make a difference. But if they're wrong and I buy property, I'm going to do well. So I knocked on people's doors, and one lady answered. I said, I want to buy your flat. And she said to me, my boy, they're going to kill us all. I said, but let me buy it anyway. Are you sure you want to do this? If they don't kill us, we're going to have to leave the country. And I bought a flat. And because I was a qualified accountant, I got like a 95% loan. So I bought that flat, and she landed up being my tenant for 16 years until she passed away. And I bought 2 flats at that time. And that's how my property life started. But when I talk about my life, sometimes I go around on one trajectory, but there were so many things all happening at the same time, so it's very difficult to cover everything. So I carried on, and I bought my first little house when I was 23, and I was really doing well in the stockbroking. And someone said to me, Nick, you don't look very successful, because I wouldn't spend money on clothes. I only bought my first car when I was 21, and it was like an old Opel. I used to catch buses until I was 21. I just rather invested in coins and whatever.
But I mean, you're still on a big scale. You're still that guy. I asked you about a watch one time, and you said, "No, sorry, I don't wear a watch." You're usually successful people like expensive stuff, but you seem it doesn't bother you.
Yes.
You rather.
There are certain things. I don't want no watches, no big brands, unless I like something that's a reasonable price, then I'll buy it. But they said, Nick, you don't look very successful. Your clothes, your cars.
You must look like a stockbroker.
You've got to look like a stockbroker. So I bought a Porsche, and I was 23. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Girls quite like it. I'm getting a lot more respect. And then I got a bit sucked into that, Because you can get sucked into materialism, Then I went to Ferraris, I had the Lamborghinis, and bought my first Lamborghini when I was 27, and it was like, then you start getting attached to those things. It becomes Nick Lambo and Nick Ferrari and stuff. So that's also, you've got to be careful to go and to avoid that direction. And then anyway, I was like 24, 25, I'm doing well. And I thought, no, I spoke to my boss. He had to give me shares in his business, and I wanted 50% of his business. And he said, no, I'll give you 5. So I spoke to a mentor of mine. He says, no, Nick, you should get more. And long story short, he says, we're going to find someone to back you. And we're looking for different financial institutions. We're speaking to overseas. And here, no one wanted to really be in South Africa as a stockbroker at the time. And then eventually, James McMillan, Lance Ford, and Johnny Solomons were independent securities. They said, listen, we'll back you. And I opened Hampton Securities, and I was the youngest stockbroker in the country at the time. Wow. But just before that, and when I was leaving, I was at Conchipera. One of my clients lost 2.2 million rand, basically wiped me out again. Now I'm talking 2.2 million in those days.
It's a lot of money.
Now I owed my boss money. I couldn't pay him. I had the stock market had crashed. So now I gave him the money I had. He's still my friend today. But it was an absolute nightmare. I couldn't get money back from the client. And so starting Hampton Securities was tough. But at the same time, just before that, a friend of mine came to me from school, and he said he wants to buy a vending machine. I said, what do you want? He said, I want you to lend me money. I said, I won't lend you money. I'll give you money, but I want 50% of the business. So he bought these machines where you buy a card, you put the card in an envelope, put the envelope in the machine. Customer comes, puts in the money, takes out the envelope, throws the envelope away, takes the card, punches the number in the phone, throws the card away. And at that time, when cellular came to South Africa, the most optimistic forecast in terms of cellular usage was 300,000 to 400,000 users across the country. You know, at that time I checked, we had 56 million users. We had more users than people because some guys had 2 cell phones and most of it was prepaid, so we were quite lucky. It was a bit of luck, a lot of luck. So me and my partner were looking at this thing and saying, well, why do we need this whole contraption? It's just a number. So we went to go find a developer. Long story short, we found someone who would do it on risk. Developed a machine which at the time was way ahead of anything in the world at the time. It was in the late 90s, early 2000s, where this machine could take notes, could take coins, had a radio pad. You could send a number to the machine. It would print out the voucher. It was linked to the internet and linked to your cell phone. And this business scaled so much because people came to us to buy a machine, and it was a great cash flow model. Buy the machine, makes a 30% margin, then you give me money to put on your machine, 20 or 30 grand. So now I'm sitting with 3 or 4 times more cash and I'm making profit, but I've got the cash flow. And now you're going to go look for sites for me because you buy machines from me. So the businesses grew. In a very short time, we were doing $250 million turnover a year.
And in what, that was like 20 years ago, 26 years ago.
Helped me, you know, then I started buying. I bought one or 2 commercial buildings, a shopping center. So it was great for us. And the trajectory was amazing. And then one day I walk into a shop and I see this version 3, which I designed. I phone my partner, I'm like, are you mad? Why did you tell me you're launching version 3? It's a big thing. He says, we haven't. I said, yeah, I'm looking at it. He says, where are you? I said, I'm here. He comes there, he looks at this thing, we work out, our technology guys are competing against us.
Your own people.
Our guys are doing our technology. Because they're doing our backend, so they could see how much money we were making. And although they said to us, all you need to do is buy 50 machines from us over 5 years, we bought 650 machines over 12 months. And we were giving them 1% of turnover every month. But they saw the money we were making, so they said they wanted more. So anyway, we got our papers together, urgent interdict. And the day before, the advocate phoned me. And he said to me, he says, Nick, do not go to court tomorrow. You've got a female judge who's just been appointed. She's, not that the female made a difference, but that's what he said to me. He said a female judge, she's just been appointed. She's not going to rule on urgency. She's going to remand it to trial because it's easier to say it's not urgent. So I said, that's not possible. I said, we're going to court. I said, anybody can see that this is urgent and it's unfair. We went to court, he says it's not urgent. And then we lost the case because now we had to wait 2 years. So 2 years down the line, we go to court. They say, listen, we'll settle with you guys. Because even if you win, what are you going to win? We're not programming for you anymore, developing for you. And the market's changed. Now it was touchscreen and all those things. So they gave us the settlement, and they moved on, you know. And they eventually made a fortune. They sold the business here to Blue Label. They had a business overseas in different countries with a vending machine. Yeah.
But it started with you guys. That's incredible. So in that time, you used that money to purchase commercial property.
Some more commercial property. Not as much as we should have, or as much as we could have, but we did. And that guy's still my partner to this day, a very good guy.
I read somewhere, essentially you, at 31, you were done working.
Yeah, so the first time I stopped was around about there. I broke off my engagement and I was like, I want to enjoy life. You know, at that point I also realized I didn't want to be the richest man anymore. Because what's the point of being the richest man in the grave? You realize Nick, the richest guy. And I said, I want to go enjoy my life. And I just traveled, and I was in Vegas and I was in Miami. And I mean, people would recognize me in Vegas from Mykonos and in Miami from Las Vegas. It was one of the most amazing times of my life. But then you also realize, I came back, and at that time I had 16 businesses, various partners. When I came back up, all of a sudden, many of them weren't doing well, and things were changing. I was like, this is, I can't leave this thing unattended. So then I started focusing again and on property, which is what I liked. And property portfolio had done reasonably well. And then I came across a guy who was a co-director of my son, named Justin Blend. And he came to talk to me about property. He was young and I was older. And we started working together, and I quickly realized that this guy and me really worked well together. He was so good where I was weak, and where he was weak, I was so good. And that's such an important thing, such an important lesson for young entrepreneurs. I always say, you don't have to be perfect, but you have to know yourself. Because if you know yourself, you can plug the holes. And sometimes you can plug the holes better than you could yourself. Say, okay, well, I'm bad at detail, let me become better at detail. No, just get someone who's great at detail. And so and I said to Justin, I said, we'll be partners one day. And he's like, no, we won't. You much all your property portfolio. I said, we will be partners one day. And there was an opportunity to invite my partner, and he did. And then Justin started on our journey. And he introduced me more to offices. I was much more retail, light industrial. And we started in Braamfontein. And we were the pioneers, one of the pioneers.
Yeah. Okay, before that, just take us back to 2010.
So this is before 2010.
Is this before 2010?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is like 2006, 2007.
So you had a partner in the property portfolio?
So it was the same guy who funded me in the supermarket. Then what happened when I became a stockbroker, we said, let's start again, let's start a portfolio. We started with 6,000 Rand each. We built it up, it really doing well. It was the 1997. And the first commercial property we bought with the money we made on the profit from Cullinan Hotel and Leisure, which was my client. And I bought an option at 30 cents for 1 million shares. And that's where I made my first R1 million of me and my partner. And we used that to buy our first commercial property in Cape Town. Yeah, Cape Town. It was actually, funny enough, it was Ocean Basket. And at the time, Ocean Basket were really battling. And there was an opportunity to buy a big stake in Ocean Basket for a very small amount of money. And we said, no, we'll just go buy your properties. And I only had a few stores at the time, so we landed up buying the Ocean Basket property in Cape Town. Anyway, Ocean Basket became what it became, so a bit of regret there maybe. Yeah. And so anyway, Justin said, let's go look in Braamfontein. And we were very successful there. We bought 76 Judith Street. That's how me and Justin actually became partners. He had brought me a deal that there was difficulty on the funding side. We managed to get that through, and that's how we started. And we bought various buildings in Braamfontein.
When you spoke to Justin, what was it on him that you lacked, that you said he's great at stuff and you great on other stuff? What was it especially with Justin that you said, listen,
his attention to detail.
Okay, the detail part. You are more the
big picture.
You see the big picture.
Strategy.
Yeah. Okay.
And Justin's a grinder, one of the best. He'll find something and he'll just pursue it until he gets it. It doesn't matter what it is. And really good at looking after the rands and cents in the business. His admin was excellent. We just really made a good team. And we built a business in a very difficult time. We did well.
That was the Braamfontein.
Well, we did Braamfontein.
Okay. That's where you started.
Yeah. Braamfontein. We did a few nice deals. 132 Jan Smuts was another nice deal. We bought the first house in Randburg. We bought a few office blocks in Rivonia. So we actually bought the one office block we bought in Rivonia was on the border of Rivonia and Morningside. Now, there's a big difference between the addresses in terms of value. So we called the buildings Morningside Corner and Morningside Hub.
Yeah, but it was actually on there.
It was actually Rivonia. It was a very difficult time because offices were going down. South Africa property market since 2010 has been an absolute nightmare. So when 2010 happened, me and Justin were really partners. But Justin didn't have the exposure that I had. I had, this was another layer that we mentioned before, but in like 2006, when I came back to start work in 2007, how I met Justin was a friend of mine. He said, come work in my office. And he says, Nick, why don't we start a property fund? So I said, well, I really want to, there's more opportunities, more money than these opportunities. But at the time, I just acquired a property here in Sandton. So I wanted to buy all the properties around the Gautrain as much as I could. But they were all institutionally owned. So the broker came to me and said, there is one we can buy. I think we can get it for 12 million. So he came to me and he said to me, he wants 45 million. He's lost his mind. I said, offer him 42. He says, Nico, you're crazy. Offer him 42. Offered him 42, he counter-offered. The broker came to me and says, Nick, I've never seen this in my life. He counter-offered 48. But I said, he only wanted 45. He says, he's counter-offered 48 and he signed. I said, accept the offer. And he says, are you mad? I said, accept the offer. Accepted the offer. I went to all the banks. Investec said, Nick, you've never made a mistake in property. This is your first one. Nedbank said, Nick, you're overpaying by 20 million. Standard Bank said, Nick, this is the best property in land in South Africa. How much do you want? And I said, I want 100% funding.
What?
They gave it to me. Now, at the time, I knew my sense was that a transport hub cannot work without density. So now you're going to bring 100,000 people today to Sandton. Where are they going to go? So if you don't have densities, they don't change the laws around Sandton, which suppress property prices around there, you're going to have a problem. And in that time, council said, there's no more limit in Sandton. You can go higher. So property, the value of property is very much a function of how much you can build on there. You can have 50 hectares, but you're allowed to build one house and not worth much. Now, all of a sudden, on this small piece of land, you could do 40 stories. Yeah. So someone offered him 70 million for the property. He reneged on the deal. But in that process, my partner Kerry says, Nick, what's the development potential on this property? I said, probably $1 billion or $2 billion. So he said, why don't you start a fund? So I don't really want to, but maybe let's do it. I've got a couple of friends who want to get involved in property with me, and then we'll use this as a platform. And we started the property fund, and we bought some vacant pieces of land at the same time while this was going on. Now all of a sudden, this looked like it was going to be a court case. It was a court case. Went to court. What his defense was he lack of capacity to act. He says, it wasn't my property, it's my wife's. So we said, okay, well, he's an attorney. We're going to take him to court. The judge will bend over backwards to prove that he's wrong. But he was very smart. He brought up an exception, which is something in law that says, let's only dispute the fact of law, nothing else. Can you or can you not dispose of property without written authority? We went there, he won that case, went on appeal. Who was his advocate? The same guy who was with me with the Alphacom case, with the vending machines. So when the opening argument happened, we could see that we were going to lose. So the advocate was Nolly Lamberis. And he said to me, he says, Nick, each time you've been on the right side morally, but I'm sorry you've lost again. And I said, Nolly, when you're with me, you win, you lose. When you're against me, you win. I said, just be consistent. But, you know, I also believe in karma in some funny ways, right? That property is still there today. He got offered 150 million for it, apparently, and didn't take it. Now, Ernst & Young built all around him, that property sterilized. I went down the road. I started doing a land assembly with individual townhouses, where the Radisson Blue is now. And I probably made 6,000% or whatever, something ridiculous. Yeah. And that was when my poker skills first came into play. Because I bought half the property of the apartment block, and another developer bought the other half, because we were buying apartment by apartment. So Herman Koster came to see me. Herman, if he's watching this, we can remember. So we're sitting down. I see in my mind, okay, I'm going to offer him, I'm telling him I want 38,000 rand a square meter for these flats. And remember, I paid like 4 or 5, geared. So it was an amazing profit. But I said, okay, I'll go down to 25 or 20. So he says, Nick, please, you got half, I got half, the stalemate. And I said, I'm not going to sell it to you, so please sell to me. So I said, okay, you can have it at 38. And then as soon as I said 38, I could just see he started developing a sweat and he started shaking. And then I knew, now because you got to look for tells, I knew that he had to buy me. I didn't know why, but I knew he had to buy me. And at that moment, I said, I'm not going down, in my head. He goes, Nick, that's a mad price. I said, Herman, you got 5 seconds. Otherwise, I'm not selling. He goes, okay.
Wow.
And then I later found, because I said to him, Herman, the deal is, if you ever sell this property, speak to me first. And then 6 months later, I think something happened to me in South Africa. I decided to leave. And he was in London. He said, Nick, you can buy the property, come meet me. So I flew to London. We met at a coffee shop in Chelsea. He says, yeah, you can buy the property here. I got the lease for Radisson Blue. I had the lease before I met you.
What?
So he had to.
He had to buy it.
He had to buy it.
What?
But the price was too big, so I didn't buy it. But I made good money from it.
Okay, cool. Justin, 2010.
So that's so that property fund, Justin's father was a co-director, and that's how we started. So then what happened was 2008, 2009, the financial crisis hit. Justin didn't have too much exposure. He was the gold building, the 76 tutor with me and the fund, and that was income generating. But I had these vacant pieces of land, plus a big property in Pretoria that I'd done the land assembly on. And all of a sudden, you've got 200-300 million in vacant land. And although 2 of the properties were in the fund, I'd signed personal surety on them. And now the bank looked at all of this and it was like, wow. And I sold the one in Pretoria and I'd sold the one in Joburg. Both deals fell through in the financial crisis. So the one was sold for 110 and the other one for 146. Both of those fell through. Still got those properties today. They're worth a fraction of what they were worth then. Because it's been an absolute disaster. There's been no service delivery. The sites are basically sterilized. There's no development demand. And it was a big lesson for me and to anybody. If you're going to buy vacant land, make sure you can hold it. Do not gear up with vacant land without the expectation and the wherewithal to deal with it if things go bad, because things do go bad. And all of a sudden people were talking about it's going to be a 20-year recession. And I was like, what? I'm not going to be able to get out of this. And at that moment, I realized that I can actually lose everything if this continues. And I closed my eyes that time and I apologized to my grandfather because I thought I could never lose all my money, not because of how much I had, but I was so diversified. I had businesses, I had properties in different locations, in different sectors. I was never going to lose. And I apologized. I said, now I realize no one's infallible. And that's also a big lesson for young entrepreneurs. If you walk in the street long enough, it's going to rain. It's going to rain. And you can either use that as an opportunity or it can take you out. But you cannot hold on in property and you get taken out. You will get taken out and you can't come back. And sometimes the comeback road is long, but sometimes it's very short. I remember the time when we decided, when I thought, oh, we're not going to get through this, for our one property in Braamfontein, it was worth 70 million. A year later, we sold it for 106. Our one property in Limbro, we put it on auction, we got 0 for it. A year and a half later, we sold it to Baldwin for 24. So it was a year. So obviously
The recovery is quick. Yeah.
The recovery, the long-term recovery wasn't there, but from the lows, it was quite quick. And then we used that as an opportunity. And I said we had the fund, and I went to my partner in the fund. I said, Ken, now we've got to grow. And also it was a big lesson to me because when I went to raise money from the shareholders of the fund, they didn't want to put money. So I said, well, these guys aren't dissimilar to a bank. What's the point of having a fund? And I said, I'm never raising money from people ever again. So the fund had a right of first refusal on my properties. So I had a big share in the fund, and they had a right of first refusal on my properties. So the director said, there's no more money, we can't raise money, you cannot grow the fund anymore. So I said, okay, we'll close the fund off, we'll deal with what we with the properties, and I'll carry on with Justin. So whatever I was doing with Justin, my share was in the fund. But then me and Justin carried on. But now we were under pressure, we couldn't get gearing. So we found a building, another one in Braamfontein, went to Sasfin Bank, said, you've got no money. Said, okay, but charge us a fee. Said, okay, we want a 33% internal rate of return, which is ridiculous. So I said to him, okay, on one condition. He said, anything. I said, I want a 50% performance fee. Anything over 33%, me and Justin get 50% of. They gave us that deal. We sold the property before transferred. So we made 50% of everything.
What?
Yeah, because we just needed the guarantee from the bank, but they didn't put money. So then obviously, see, we're not doing that deal anymore, but we will fund you guys. And that's when me and Justin continued to grow. We did some really good deals. And then 2017, so then the two younger partners, Grant and Greg, we had funded independently before, and I really liked them. And in 2017, I wanted to step back. So when you're going to have your golden years, when you're 75, people don't understand that there's a utility value of money. The utility of money isn't the same throughout your life. If you're 98 years old and you've got $1 million, it's worth zip. If you've got $1 million when you're 20 or 30 or 40, you can skydive, you can go on horseback. The utility is unbelievable. So I was in my mid-40s, and we brought in Greg and Grant, and they were amazing for the business. Grant's very similar to me, so he dovetailed well with Justin. We had a great into the office market and to the institutions, and they saw opportunity to convert. So rewind again. One of my old investments was Ezrawini Properties, Brian van Holt, still partners to this day. Our partnership spans over 2 decades. We had done a conversion in Bruma.
So just for argument's sake, so conversions is you're taking office blocks and converting them into residential units.
Yeah, so it wasn't widely done then, but the office market was declining at a rapid rate.
Especially, I think the COVID era, I want to come to the PwC building because I think that's the most famous one that you've done. Am I correct? Not.
Yeah. What's the space?
Okay. Yeah. So they're still coming. Yeah. But I mean, that was one of the big in COVID. Just a story about that PwC ended their lease agreement with that Sunnyside building. Correct?
Yeah, with Sunny Hill building.
Sunny Hill. Yeah. And then you guys purchased it. I remember on the first time I met you, you said, listen, I think the value was like in that area was like crazy, and you bought it at...
Yeah, it was. These buildings were sitting empty, and the market wasn't getting better, it was getting worse, and then you had COVID. And we put in an cash offer for it. It was the beginning of COVID. But before that, we had bought the building across the road. And we were very nervous because what we were doing now, no one had done before in the northern suburbs. People had converted in town. But it's fine, you've got a different demographic. Or these guys going to want to live in an office building in the north. And we really pondered on it because it was a big risk. Should we, shouldn't we, should we, shouldn't we? And eventually, well, first we put an advert to see if there was demand, and there was no demand. But we said, well, listen, it's also difficult for people to rent on a pamphlet, So we decided to go ahead with it, and that was successful. So we knew with the PwC building that we knew that the letting risk was a bit lower. And that was a real landmark or flagship development at the time. It was over 600 units. But what is amazing about the model is that we're bringing people who previously couldn't afford to live in those areas to live in the areas, young professionals who now also save money on transport. Unlimited Wi-Fi, lived in very respectable premises. Apartments were small, but Olympics house or half Olympics house, swimming pool, yoga studios, work from home facilities, fully equipped gym, all inclusive for 6,000 rand a month. So really revolutionary. I mean, what Africrest has done to the Johannesburg landscape and social landscape, been amazing. You know, I think the pipeline will have 11,000 apartments. And that's, now I often speak to someone if they know someone or either they've lived in an AfriFest apartment, which makes me very proud. And watching my partners develop the way they have has been a thing of beauty.
Jeez, man. It's an amazing story. Obviously, the time has run out, but I want to thank you. It's been inspirational. Every time I speak to you, we mostly speak about combat sports on weekends. But no, man, it's been a privilege, and thank you for taking the time to share your story. Obviously, I think you still need to write the book. There's gonna be it's gonna be a major hit.